I want to start by telling you what kind of person I am, because I think it matters for what I am about to tell you. I am an electrician. I have been doing this work for 10 years, and what it has taught me, more than anything else, is that strange things have explanations. A light that flickers on its own has a loose neutral somewhere in the circuit. A breaker that trips for no apparent reason has a load problem or a fault that nobody has found yet. A house that feels wrong and makes its owners afraid has aluminum wiring from the 70s that somebody covered up with drywall and forgot about. I have walked into dozens of houses that people described with words like haunted or wrong, or something is off about this place. And in every single case, I found the thing that was causing the feeling. And it was a thing with a physical explanation that I could fix with the right tools. I say this so you understand that when I tell you the eyes outside my back window are not an animal, I am not a person who makes that determination lightly. I am a person who has been wrong about strange things being strange every time I have ever encountered them. I have not been wrong about this. I bought the house in early March of last year. 3-bedroom ranch on 2 acres on the rural edge of Ferncroft, which is a small town in the hill country of western North Carolina that most people from the rest of the state have never heard of, and that I have been driving past on the way to job sites for most of my working life without ever stopping. The house needed work, which I knew going in and priced into the offer. The electrical was outdated, which I could handle myself. The back deck was rotting in the corners and needed replacing. The kitchen was from a decade that had different ideas about counter space. What the inspection did not turn up, because there is no box on an inspection form for it, was the eyes. I noticed them the first night. My friend Will had helped me move in that Saturday, the two of us carrying furniture up the porch steps and assembling beds and getting the kitchen functional enough to be worth sleeping near. And by evening, the essential work was done, and Will was in the guest room, and I was sitting on the back steps with a beer, looking at the 2 acres and the woods behind them in the way you look at land you just signed your name to, with the particular mix of satisfaction and responsibility that comes with owning a thing. The woods behind the property are dense second-growth forest that climbs the hill for several miles before meeting the edge of the national forest. In the dark, they were a solid black wall at the edge of the yard. The tree line may be 80 feet from the steps, and I was looking at them and thinking about the deck I was going to build and the drainage work I needed to do along the east side and all the things a person thinks about on the first evening in a new house. Then I saw the eyes, 2 points of light at the tree line, low and steady. The amber-orange glow of an animal's eyes catching the light from the back of the house. I have seen eyeshine my whole life. Deer in headlights, raccoons in the beam of a flashlight, the occasional fox at the edge of a job site at dusk. I looked at the eyes for a moment, and they blinked out, and I went inside and did not think about it again. The second night, I did not go out to the back steps. The third night I did, and the eyes were there. Same position, same height, same gap between the 2 large oaks at the left edge of the property where the yard met the woods. I watched them for a minute, and they did not move. And then I went inside. I am a person who notices details. It is most of what my job requires. The ability to look at a thing and register exactly what it is doing and what it should be doing, and what the difference between those two things tells you. And what I noticed over the following 2 weeks, standing on the back steps every evening with a beer or a cup of coffee, was that the details were wrong. The position was always exactly the same. I mean exactly. Not in the same general area, not on the same side of the tree line. The same position every night, as though whatever was watching me had a specific place it came to in order to watch, a designated spot, and it returned to that spot the way you return to your chair at the kitchen table. Animals do not do that. Animals move through space in response to food and threat and territory. The deer that came onto the property grazed across it from different directions on different evenings. The fox I had seen twice crossed the yard on its own business and paid me no attention. But the eyes at the tree line had a spot, and they returned to it with a consistency that was not animal. The glow was wrong. Eyeshine is reflected light, a bounce back from behind the retina that varies with angle and light source and the species you are looking at. What I was seeing at the tree line glowed. I want to be careful about this word because I know what it implies, and I am an electrician and I know the difference between a light source and a reflection. The eyes at the tree line had the quality of something producing its own light. Not brightly, not in a way that lit the surrounding area, or would have been visible to someone who did not know where to look, but steady in a way that reflected light was not steady, in a way that did not change when I moved, or when a cloud crossed the moon, or when I turned the back porch light on and off. I called Will and told him I thought I had a bobcat at the tree line. He said probably, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah," and changed the subject and spent the next 3 nights on the steps knowing it was not a bobcat. I stopped at the hardware store in Ferncroft on a Thursday to pick up conduit fittings for a job I was finishing that week. The man behind the counter had a name tag that said Norm and the face of someone who had been in one place long enough to know everything that had happened in it. We talked about the job and the fittings, and then, because I had been thinking about it all week, and because hardware store conversations in small towns have a natural latitude that city hardware stores do not have, I described what I had been seeing at the tree line. Norm went still in the way of someone recognizing something. He asked which property I had bought. I told him the address. He nodded once, slowly, and said I should go talk to Della Marsh, who lived about a mile up the county road from my house and had been on that hillside longer than anyone else I was likely to meet in Ferncroft. I asked if I should call first. He said Della did not use a phone much, but she was generally home in the afternoons and she would not mind the visit if I told her Norm sent me. I drove up the county road that afternoon. Della Marsh was 74 years old and small and direct in the way of people who have been somewhere long enough that they have stopped needing to be anything other than themselves. She had a dog named Earl who was the size of a small bear and who assessed me from his spot by the door and decided I was not interesting and went back to sleep. She made tea without asking, and we sat at her kitchen table, and I told her everything, the position and the glow and the consistency of it, in the order I had noticed things. She listened without any expression that suggested surprise. When I finished, she said that the property I bought had had those eyes at the tree line for as long as anyone she knew could remember. She said the couple I bought it from had lived there for 11 years and knew about the eyes and were fine. The people before them knew too. She said the eyes had been part of that specific property going back to the oldest accounts she was aware of, which meant a long time. I asked what they were. She said she did not know, and she wanted to be clear about that because she had found over the years that an honest, incomplete answer was more useful than a confident, wrong one. She said what she knew was what the eyes did and what they did not do, and that was the knowledge I needed. She said they watched. They had always watched. They watched the property and whoever was on it, and they did it from the tree line. And they had never, in any account she had from anyone who had lived near that property over the decades, come inside or harmed anyone. Then she told me the rules. The first rule was not to shine a light at the eyes, not a flashlight, not the porch light aimed directly at them, not a phone screen. She said the eyes did not respond well to being lit directly, and not responding well meant they moved closer. And when they moved closer, the quality of the watching changed from the passive, distant watching that could be tolerated to something more active and more present that she did not want to describe in detail. She said no one she knew of had been harmed by the closer watching. She said it was simply not something worth experiencing if it could be avoided. The second rule was to acknowledge the eyes before going inside at night. Not formally, not necessarily with words, just a look, a direct moment of eye contact before turning away and going through the door. She said the eyes had been watching from that tree line for a very long time, and the people who had lived well alongside them were the people who treated the watching as a relationship rather than an intrusion. A relationship had two parties, and the respectful thing was to acknowledge the other party before ending an encounter. She said she knew this sounded like she was trying to make folklore sound practical, and that she had said the same thing to 3 different people who had moved near that property, and all 3 of them told her later it was the most useful thing she had told them. The third rule was the one that stayed with me longest. She said if the eyes ever came to the front of the house, to the windows facing the road rather than the woods, I should leave for the night. Not urgently, not in fear, just leave. Go somewhere else and come back in the morning. She said the eyes were a back of the house thing, a tree-lined thing, something that belonged to the border between the property and the forest, and if they came to the front, it meant the arrangement had been disrupted and the disruption needed to settle overnight before I slept there. She said this had happened twice in her knowledge of that property, once badly, once well. The bad time was a family that tried to drive the eyes off with noise and lights. She said she did not recommend this approach. The good time was a man who simply said out loud that he needed to step out for the night, and did, and came back in the morning and everything was where it belonged. I asked what had disrupted the arrangement those times. She said the family had been doing heavy groundwork near the tree line, cutting and digging too close to the border for too long. She said the man had been having large gatherings on the back of the property for several weekends running, and the activity level had been too high and too sustained. She said the eyes liked a quiet backyard and a respectful distance and a person who looked at them, when they looked at him. She wrapped her hands around her tea mug and looked at me directly. She said it was not a complicated arrangement if a person did not make it complicated. I drove home along the county road in the late afternoon, the hills green and beginning to show the first new leaves of spring, and I thought about what she had told me with the part of my mind that had been listening to the explanations of old-timers my whole working life, the part that sorted useful from not useful and practical from ornamental. What Della had given me was practical, all of it. No light. Acknowledge before going in. Leave if they come to the front. These were rules, with the quality of rules that had been worked out through experience rather than invented. The quality of things that had been tested against a real situation and found to work. I trusted them the way I trusted wiring diagrams. That night, I went out to the back steps after dark and stood in the cold March air and looked at the tree line. The eyes were there, in the gap between the two oaks, steady and faintly glowing in the dark. I looked at them directly for the first time, not a glance, not a monitoring check from the periphery of my attention, but a real look. The same direct attention I gave to a circuit I was trying to understand. I stood there for 5 minutes, and they looked back at me, and neither of us did anything. And then I nodded once, which was not something Della told me to do, but which came naturally. The way you nod to a neighbor, you pass on the street without having anything to say, and I went inside. I slept better that night than I had since moving in. I did not make too much of this. I was settling into a new house, and sleep improves when you settle. But I noticed it. I called Will the next afternoon and told him everything, the full version, Della and the rules, and what I had worked out about the eyes being wrong from the beginning. He was quiet on the other end for a longer moment than Will was usually quiet. Then he asked if I was planning to sell. I thought about it. I actually sat with the question and turned it over, which told me something because I had not thought about selling before this moment. I said no. He asked, why not? I said the house was good and the land was good and the electrical I had already replaced was excellent, and the eyes had been there for 11 years while the previous owners lived their lives in that house, and I did not see a reason why I would not also be fine if I followed the rules. I said most people probably had something watching them from somewhere and did not know it, and knowing was better than not knowing, because knowing came with Della's rules. Will said that was an extremely calm response to having something watching me from the tree line every night. I said I had thought about it, and that was where I landed. He said okay, and I could hear in the okay that he was not entirely sure what to do with this conversation. And I understood that because I was not entirely sure either. I had the back deck rebuilt in April by a contractor from Ferncroft named Dave, who did good work and did not ask questions about the fact that I wanted to keep all the work well clear of the tree line. The decking went up over 2 weeks, and during that time the eyes shifted to the far right edge of the property, further back in the trees, the same general presence, but moved to give the work some room. I noticed this on the second day of construction and watched it with the attention I gave to things that told me something about how a system operated. The eyes were not disrupted by the construction. They accommodated it. They moved to maintain their watching from a position that was not directly in the middle of activity. This told me something about the intelligence of whatever I was dealing with, and the something it told me was not reassuring in simple terms, but was useful in practical ones. There was understanding happening on the other side of the tree line. The eyes were not a passive phenomenon. They were active, responsive, operating with something that functioned like judgment. I kept this information in the part of my head where I kept things I could not fully use yet, and went back to work. The deck was finished in the last week of April, and the eyes returned to the gap between the two oaks the following Monday, as though the construction had been noted and accepted and the arrangement was back in effect. I stood on the new deck that evening and looked at them in their usual spot and felt something I had not expected to feel, which was something close to relief. Will came up for a long weekend in June, and we sat on the new deck with beers on the first evening, and I pointed out the eyes, and he looked for a long time before he saw them. That specific faint glow in the gap between the oaks, and when he found them, he was quiet in the way of someone recalibrating. He said, "They are always there, any night you go outside." I said yes. He asked if I ever stopped noticing them. I thought about that honestly. I said I did not stop noticing them, but I had stopped being unsettled by them the way I was in the first weeks. I said the consistency of them was its own kind of reassurance. They were in the same place every night, and they stayed at the tree line, and they had been doing this for longer than I had owned the property. What I knew was where they were and what they did and the rules for living alongside them. And that combination made the situation manageable in a way that most genuinely strange situations were not manageable. Will asked if I thought the eyes knew we were talking about them. I looked at the gap between the two oaks. The eyes were steady and faintly glowing in the summer dark, the way they were every night. I said probably. Will drank his beer and looked at the tree line for a while, and then said he was going to need another beer before he was ready to think about that, and he went inside, and I stayed on the deck for a while longer, and the eyes and I looked at each other in the warm June dark, and the arrangement held the way it always held, and I went in when I was ready. The night the rules really mattered came in late August. I had been doing drainage work along the east side of the property for most of the week, digging a channel to redirect water away from a low spot that had been soggy since the spring thaw. The work was staying well clear of the tree line, nothing that should have been a problem, but it was significant groundwork, and it was running close to dark by Thursday evening, because I wanted to finish the main trench before rain came through on the weekend. I was working with a headlamp and the light from the back of the house, and it was past 10 before I put the spade away and brushed off my hands and went to the steps. I looked at the gap between the two oaks. The eyes were not there. I stood very still. I scanned the tree line the way I had learned to scan it over 6 months, looking for the specific quality of that faint, steady glow against the dark mass of the trees. I went slowly, left to right, taking my time. Nothing at the tree line. The understanding of what this meant arrived in my chest before my brain had time to finish the thought. I turned slowly. The eyes were at the side window of the house, not at the tree line, not at the back of the property, at the window on the east side of the house, the window that faced not the woods, but the yard, and beyond it, the county road. They were close, 10 feet from the house at most, at the height of the windowsill, steady and present and watching, and they were closer to me than they had ever been in 6 months, and the quality of the watching was different. I could feel it as a physical thing, a weight in the air that had not been there before. My hand went toward my phone. My thumb moved toward the flashlight. I stopped. I stood in the dark with my thumb on the side of my phone, and I thought about Della's first rule, and I did not turn on the light. I thought about the third rule instead. She had said, if the eyes came to the front of the house, leave for the night. These were not quite at the front, but they were not at the tree line, and they were not where they were supposed to be, and the spirit of the rule was clear. Something had been disrupted, and it needed to settle, and I needed to not be here while it did. I said it out loud, not loudly, just in a normal voice, the way you would say something to a person who was standing 10 feet away from you in the dark. I said I was sorry for working so late, and that I knew that was too close to the tree line area and too much noise at too late an hour, and that I was going to go inside and get my keys and go to Will's for the night, and I would be back in the morning. I do not know why I apologized. It came out of me naturally, the same way an apology comes when you have accidentally inconvenienced someone who has been patient with you. I went inside. I did not rush. I got my keys from the hook by the door, and my phone and a change of clothes in a bag, and I walked out the front door and got in my truck and drove to Asheville and slept on Will's couch. In the morning, I drove back along the county road in the early light, the hills going gold with the first suggestion of fall coming into the high elevation, and I pulled into my driveway and went around to the back of the house and looked at the tree line. The eyes were in the gap between the two oaks. The arrangement was intact. I stood on the back steps and looked at them for a long time in the morning light, longer than usual, and then I nodded and went inside and made coffee and went to work. I have told this story to several people over the past year, and I have learned something from the telling of it, which is that the part people find most difficult is not the eyes themselves, or the rules, or even the August night. The part people find most difficult is that I stayed. I understand why. From the outside, the situation is a man who bought a house that came with something watching him from the woods every night, and rules for not provoking it. And the reasonable response to that situation is to sell the house and buy a different one that does not have those features. I have had this pointed out to me by people I respect, and I have thought about it each time with genuine seriousness. And each time I come back to the same answer, which is that the house is good, and the land is good, and the hills in the fall are worth driving an hour out of your way to see. And the eyes have been at that tree line for longer than I have been alive, and the people who lived in that house before me built lives there and raised families there and went about the ordinary business of being people without being harmed. The arrangement works if you follow the rules. I have followed the rules for over a year, and the arrangement has held. That is the evidence I have, and I am a person who works with evidence. I am writing this on a cool evening in early spring, a little over a year since I carried the first boxes up the porch steps with Will's help. And I want to say something useful to anyone who's reading this because they have seen something similar outside their own windows. Do not shine a light at them. I want to say this first and most clearly because it is the instinct, and the instinct is wrong, and the wrongness of it matters. Find the person who has been on that land the longest, not the previous owners, who may not have been there long enough to know anything useful. The person whose knowledge of the specific place is old enough to have pattern in it, and who has had enough time to work out what the pattern means. In my case, this was Della. In your case, it will be someone, and they will know, and what they know will be more useful than anything you can figure out on your own in the first frightening weeks. Acknowledge the eyes before you go in at night. Look at them directly and let them look at you, and then go inside. Whatever has been watching that property was watching it before you arrived, and it will watch it after you leave. And the decent thing is to be a neighbor about it. And if they come to the front of the house, go somewhere else for the night. Come back in the morning. Say something out loud before you leave, something honest. Because whatever is at the tree line has been paying close attention to you, and it has earned honesty. Tell it you are stepping out for the night. Apologize if an apology feels right, because it probably is right if you are in a situation where you need to invoke that rule. Come back in the morning. It will be where it belongs. Tonight the hills are dark above the tree line, and the creek at the lower edge of the property is running with the snowmelt coming down from the high elevation, and the sky is the clear dark blue of a March night in the mountains, full of stars. I have been out on the back steps with a cup of coffee for 20 minutes. The air is cold enough that I can see my breath, and the field is still patchy with the last of the late season snow. And everything smells like cold water and pine, and the particular clean smell of a mountain evening at the end of winter. In the gap between the two oaks, the eyes are there. They are there the way they are every night, steady and faintly glowing, patient and present and entirely themselves. I have looked at those eyes on more than 300 evenings now, and I cannot tell you what they are, or why they are there, or what the watching means to whatever is doing the watching. What I can tell you is that the arrangement holds. I look at them for a few more minutes, and the hills are quiet around us, and the stars are out, and there is nowhere else I want to be. Then I nod once and go inside.